Geek Live. This is a live stream all about Daenerys Targaryen today, and I have to say I have got a very special guest on today, who's the extremely talented Vanessa Cole. Do you want to say hi?
Hello, everyone. So good to be here. I feel like it's been a while.
It has. I think it was
Yeah.
Westworld season 2 when you were last on.
Yeah, I did another live stream about Game of Thrones past that. I think, but it's been a long time ago, so it's good to be back.
Excellent. It's fantastic to have you back. So for those who don't know, Vanessa, well, why don't you big yourself up? What do you do?
Sure. So I am a contributing writer to WatchersOnTheWall.com. I'm also the deputy editor for WestworldWatchers.com. So when that comes back on next year, definitely check us out over there. And I also do art. I have a website that you can check out some of my work at vkcoleart.com. There's also an online shop there. And I'm now on Patreon. So if anyone wants to support me there, it's also VK Cole Art on Patreon.
Absolutely. And I was going to do this later, but I'll do it now because I always try and embarrass Vanessa. You will be able to see somewhere up here-ish is a very far away picture, but this is, if I can get it right, that is the quality of what she does, which is amazing.
Thank you.
I don't just say that I like her stuff. I have it in my home. So, guys, I would highly recommend.
I'm wearing it, actually. I'm wearing something of mine right now. You get on there. So Ghost. Yeah. So I do have t-shirts too.
There is a link down in the description, guys. But the way we're going to do this today is how we usually do this. That I've got some questions for my patrons. We'll get to them as soon as we can, and they'll provide the structure. If you're interested in supporting the channel, there's a link down there through Patreon. That's one of the benefits, is you get a chance to sort of have priority on questions for these live streams. So I'll structure it through them. If there's any super chats, we'll get to them as soon as we possibly can. Also super stickers that I only discovered last week, but are now apparently available. And why don't we just start with a sort of an opening question, Vanessa? And I mean, I know you're a big Daenerys fan. We should probably get that one out there to start with. But so 26 Art Girl was saying, at this point I'm mixing up the book and the show Daenerys. Could you separate the two? So if I start with just the health warning, obviously the book is a long way behind the show now. So where we have Daenerys in the book is out in the Dothraki Sea. If you remember the scene from way back in season 5 or whatever it was, Drogon flies her off and just sort of drops her down there. This is just before all of the Dothraki capture her again, and then she gains control of them. So we're still in that position on her own with Drogon out in the Dothraki Sea. But in terms of sort of the characterization or the storyline so far, what would you say are the main differences, if any, between the book and the show?
Oh, there's probably quite a few, but I'll try to keep it somewhat brief. I think the biggest difference is the age. And I think it really impacts how she's viewed both in the story and by the readers and the TV audience, knowing that in the books she's, I think, maybe 15 by now. I don't think we've gotten her age since probably the first book. But so she's really, really young. She's just a teenager. She's, very mature, obviously, for her age. She's been through a lot in her, 15 years. But it really impacts her decision making. She obviously, being a teenager, she's very emotional, and I think it makes her look a little worse on the show because she's been aged up so much, and you don't really understand why she might be impulsive and why she might do the things that she does. You're also in her head a lot more in the books, and it's kind of a downfall of a visual medium where you don't really get to see what she's thinking. They didn't, unfortunately, give Emilia a lot of scenes where she's confiding in people to really get her in her thoughts. You just see how she interacts with most other people, that she doesn't really confide in anyone except maybe Miss Sandy, and you don't get very much of that in the show. But the only other thing that I would say is I think a big difference between book and show is in the books, there are a lot of decisions that she makes that are her taking her own agency and making actually pretty smart decisions. She's actually pretty tactical. She makes very smart um, battle strategies when she's planning to conquer the cities in Slaver's Bay. And in the show, they give a lot of those decisions to her advisors, like Jorah and Tyrion, and some of the more impulsive, maybe morally gray or morally bad decisions that she makes in the show. Some of those could be attributed to some bad advisors in the book. So I feel like they have tried to make her a darker character in the show, and maybe that's because in the book she hasn't quite gotten to that point yet. We all anticipate she's going to go pretty dark in The Winds of Winter just because of her last chapter in A Dance with Dragons, where she decides to fully embrace her fire and blood conqueror mentality. And so we'll probably see that really come out in the next book. But yeah, I think they definitely made her more of a darker character in the show from what we've seen so far in the novels.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would agree with all of that. I'd probably just draw out a couple of things on in the books. It's her age plays in really strongly at the beginning, in particular. I find in that the idea that she might get sort of given away to somebody to be married to them on the show, they kind of glossed over that in a couple of episodes. That any kind of bad implications of that, but it's very obvious that she is just a young teenager scared, being just sold off because there are more powerful men in her lives and making her do stuff that she doesn't necessarily want to do, to put it delicately. So that is quite a traumatic beginning for her. I would also say that there's clearly, and I will get onto a moment in what drives her, because I'd be quite interested in your take on this whole House with the Red Door thing. But there's also, you talked about the advisors. There's Quaithe, who we only saw very briefly on the show, but in the books, she's in Dany's mind, and she's like always trying to give her advice and saying, "Remember who you are. You're a Targaryen." You know, pushing her effectively towards the kinds of things that we saw her do in the show. Now, as you were saying, that last chapter we have with her in the Dance of Dragons, it seems to suggest that she might be heading that way. I certainly think that something very similar is going to be happening with the Dothraki, that she's going to be burning things down and getting them on her side, and also leading her invasion. So the broad sort of next season's worth, as it were, is going to be happening. But yes, there are subtle shades in what we have in terms of the character of Daenerys that we see. We had a super chat from Lisa Love. Thank you so much for saying thanks for the live stream. Carry on. Well, thank you. We will. We also had a couple of super chats just before we went on air from Maura Lee. Thank you, Maura. I really appreciate it. Saying, in honor of Dany and the Targaryen queens who came before her, just my show of love, appreciation, and support for all the excellent guests and content on your channel. Thank you. And this is for all the wonderful stories on the Well Told Tale. Thank you. And I will talk about the Well Told Tale a little bit later in this. But as I was sort of getting onto there, what do you think, Vanessa, about what drives Dany? Because on the show, it's very much this idea of, I will take what is mine with fire and blood. That seems to be the thing for most of the sort of the show. Certainly the second half, the last few seasons, that seems to be the thing driving her. But in the books, there's also this kind of balance with this idea of the house with the red door, this memory of a sort of idyllic few years of childhood. What do you think is actually driving her as a character?
Well, I definitely think in the books, it's the thought of home and having a place where she can feel safe. I really take issue with people saying that she's a very entitled character. And maybe she is, but I don't think she's any more entitled than any other lords and ladies in Westeros that grow up with that privilege of, being part of a great house and, being able to rule over a region of Westeros, or Stannis, who feels like it's his duty to become king because he's the legitimate heir. She feels like her family was unjustly kicked out of Westeros and sent into exile. She doesn't really know a whole lot about her family history and her father. I think she's gotten a little bit of information, but she doesn't quite know the extent of it. So she feels it's her duty as the last of her line to take back the throne and reinstate what was stolen in her mind. So I definitely don't see her as entitled. I think she feels the weight of, 300 years of this family legacy of greatness from all the stories that she's heard of them conquering the continent and ruling for so long. And she doesn't want to let that legacy down, I don't think. And to the other point about the house with the red door, she spent most of her childhood running from city to city, trying to escape assassins. Whether they were actually assassins sent after them at that point, we don't know, but that's what, she had been told. They had to sell off all their belongings. They were, relying on people to take them in and take care of them because they had nothing left. And so she has these memories of being in this house with the red door with Sir Willem Darry when they first got to Braavos. And I do think it was actually in Braavos. I know there are some alternate theories out there, but I definitely think it was in Braavos. But that's the time that she remembers being the most happy and safe and cared for. And she is constantly striving to find that again. She wants home, she wants family, and she's never really felt that since that point. Even I think with Dothraki, even though she did kind of become part of that culture and adapt really well. And I do think in some ways she did love Khal Drogo, although I would argue it's kind of a Stockholm syndrome type of thing, given her age, and she was forced into it and she really didn't have an option. But she wants to be safe. She wants to have a home. She wants to have love. And like I said, I think the other side of the coin is wanting to carry on the tradition of Targaryen greatness. And you can argue that that's a bad thing and that she shouldn't want to do that, considering some of the horrible things that that family did. But I really relate to her in a way, and I feel like I can understand. I was an only child. I constantly felt this pressure to become successful and make something of myself and not let my parents down because I was it, and so I can kind of understand why she might feel like, okay, I'm it, I've got to really make an impact and do something good. And then the other thing that really motivates her obviously is liberation and freeing the slaves. She felt like a slave herself, constantly under the thumb of her abusive brother, and then sold off to the Dothraki. And so she's finally gained some agency, and she wants to use that to help others. She's got lots of quotes in the books about how kings and queens are made to do justice and made to protect those who can't protect themselves. And so, these are her own thoughts. We're in her head. And so anyone that says, she's just, a bad person and all she cares about is getting power and ruling, it's not really that. The reason she wants power is to be able to affect the lives of those less fortunate and be able to make a change for the better for those people.
Yeah. I think, so first of all, on Braavos, I completely agree. Yes, it was Braavos. I have a video on it if you want my reasons, but I think it's pretty much beyond doubt it was in Braavos. On the entitled thing, I think, this is slight semantics perhaps. I think entitled is the right word, because I think that she does feel that she is entitled to sit on the throne. But I would agree completely that is no more of a sense of entitlement than any of the other lords and ladies in Westeros. They all feel that they have a right to the position that they have had in society by dint of being born who they are. So I think that there is that kind of, I will take what is mine is a very kind of like, I think this belongs to me and I'm going to take it, and if people get in the way, then I'm going to get rid of them. But the balance is with this idea that I think you said it very well, with a home and peace and wanting to have a life which is not just about all this struggle, but it is actually about feeling safe. And she comes back to, and the reason why we talk about this house with the red door is that she thinks about it or dreams about it a dozen times or more. This isn't just a throwaway comment by George R. R. Martin. This is something that she keeps on coming back to. And I think that he is trying to draw out for us this concept of somebody who's a kind of like a multi-layered kind of character, but also kind of a torn spirit between two different drives. And we saw that in Meereen. He was talking about what happened in Meereen quite a bit, and the fact that in Meereen, in the books, comes out a little bit in the show, but it's mostly in the books, she tries her best to set herself up as being Queen of Meereen and doing the right thing. And she gets faced with tough decision after tough decision, and it gets harder and harder, but she is trying her best to do what she thinks is the right thing there. And then she gets taken out and away from this. This is the last chapter we were talking about, and suddenly she's got Quaithe talking at her again about, remember who you are. She's got these visions of thoughts of fire and blood and all the rest of it, and it's almost as if then she's been taken over to this other place where actually now she's sort of re-embracing her Targaryenness. And so it's almost like this kind of torn soul that we've got, that I think George R. R. Martin is trying to show us. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I definitely do agree with that. And I agree with you. Entitled is an appropriate word. I disagreed with the connotation that a lot of people use it in. And because I feel like they kind of target her and let, the attitudes and, and misdeeds of some of the other characters who are worse go, just because a lot of people just don't like her. And I think I like what you were talking about, Meereen, where she's really trying her best, and she actually succeeds really well at achieving the peace. People think that she's not a good ruler, and I disagree. I think she does what's necessary. It's hard for her, but ruling is hard. I mean, that's the point George is trying to make, that it's not easy to be in charge. I think her downfall is that she is constantly being undermined by people close to her. Like the Shave Pate, for instance. We think that he's, probably got some nefarious plans going on, especially when she leaves, because he doesn't want the peace. He wants to get rid of all the old noble families. And so when you have people that you're supposed to be working with and who are your supposed allies working against you, of course it's going to make it hard for any kind of sustainable peace. And then I think the other problem is she is very naive in some ways because of her age. I think, with Miri Mazdur in the first book, she had this expectation that, oh, well, I saved her, so she should, feel grateful and help me. She has a kind of a naivety with some of the people like the Shave Pate, like the Green Grace, who could actually be the Harpy. There are some really good theories out there about that. And she doesn't seem to recognize that these people could actually be plotting against her. It's funny to me where she does have suspicions about people, but a lot of the times it's on the wrong people, and she trusts people that she shouldn't be trusting. And so I think that's going to probably be a continued theme throughout the rest of the books.
Yeah, and it's worth saying that although in on the show she did have this team of advisors around her, in the books it's going to be even more massive, because we've got Marwyn the Mage coming across. Tyrion's there. She's got Quaithe speaking in her ear all the time. Obviously, we've still got Barristan still alive. So the team she will have around her is going to be even bigger. Exactly, Moqorro. They're going to have a massive team around her with a lot of voices advising her in a lot of different ways. Just a couple of quick things to pick up on. Lost for Words with a very generous. Thank you very much, Super Sticker. I very much appreciate that. And thank you. And also a question I just spotted in the chat. Very quickly, Andrew K. Just saying, I like your Sea Lord's Palace theory with the House of the Red Door. I just wonder, why do you think their sudden hospitality was cut short? I think this is a really interesting question, so I'll try and give quite a quick answer on it. For those who don't know, so there was a period of, I think it was 5 years, when Daenerys was at this house with the red door with a lemon tree growing outside her window. That all the clues seem to be suggesting this was the Sea Lord's palace in Braavos. And then she remembers suddenly they just got kicked out of there, effectively, and then they were traveling around Essos all over the place, just sort of begging for hospitality from people. So the question is, why were they suddenly kicked out? And I think that there are two broad answers to this. I think the first answer is that, and the context first, it was a very political thing for them to be having the exiled ruler and heir of Westeros staying in the Sea Lord's palace in Braavos. That was a very, very high risk strategy for the Sea Lords to be undertaking. And after 5 years, it would have become apparent that actually Robert's rebellion was going to stick. There wasn't suddenly going to be this great uprising of Targaryen loyalists going to kick them back out again. Actually, these were not this is not like the king in exile about to retake Westeros. That suddenly looked like it wasn't going to be happening anymore. Their allies were being frittered away. But I would also say Braavos is an incredibly cutthroat political world, and the Sea Lord can change very quickly. If the Sea Lord gets assassinated, the new Sea Lord comes in with new ideas, suddenly the whole thing changes. And so I suspect what happened is that a new Sea Lord came in, suddenly they were not welcome anymore, the political equation, the benefits of Braavos of keeping them there would probably be looking minimal at best, and so that's the point at which they got chucked out. So that's my overall take on that one. Did you have any thoughts on that, Vanessa, before I move on?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I definitely think the old Sea Lord died, and I think I remember Syrio Forel talking about how he was the first Sword of Braavos, and when that Sea Lord died, the new Sea Lord cut him loose, basically. And so, my pet theory, it doesn't really impact the plot whatsoever, is that Syrio was the first sword under the Sea Lord who Dany and Viserys were living with. So they may have even met, which won't matter because Syrio is most likely dead, but still.
Yeah, and I
just think it's a cool little nugget.
I think it is. And I agree that I don't think we've got the evidence for this, but it kind of works and is nice because he is obviously an ex-First Sword, presumably from an ex-Sea Lord, and so it all ties in really well. So I like it. I like that theory a lot. Anime Lover Nicole, thank you so much for the super chat saying, hi, I'm late to the party. Don't know if you already answered my question. Haven't yet. We're going to get onto that one in just a moment. But I just found out that the Ling Empress married both a Yi Ti and a Ling Man. Yeah, that's interesting. Your question was about who Dany might be marrying, so we'll get onto that one in a moment. Thank you so much for that. Let's go on to a question from Bonds, who's saying, being that Barristan Selmy thinks that Daenerys looks very similar to Ashara Dane, what do you think about the possibilities that Ashara is her mother, with either Aerys or Rhaegar being the father, or is this just another red herring by George R.R. Martin? I have thoughts on this, but I'll throw it to you to start on this one.
I think Daenerys' parents were Aerys and Rhaella. I mean, I think it's as simple as that. I don't think every character in the story needs to have some hidden parentage. I happen to believe this one is as it's been laid out to us. Viserys was, 6 or 7 when she was born. I would think he would remember if his mother wasn't actually pregnant, or if she'd given birth to a baby that then died, or I mean, I would think he would remember. He was there. I think he would remember if they actually lived in Braavos and not somewhere else. So, because he was part of her life from birth, I just find some of those theories to be difficult to believe. And I think we should probably take this one at face value. There really hasn't been anything in the books that I believe hints at it being somebody else.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of those ones that I try and take the sarcasm out of my voice when I say the only thing I've got against this is the complete lack of evidence, is that there's nothing to support this. The only reason why anyone thinks this is because Barristan Selmy looks at Daenerys's eyes and go, oh, they're the same color as Ashara Danes, who was a woman that he loved. So actually, yes, he notices when people have that very rare color of eyes. And George R. R. Martin has gone on record as saying it is pure coincidence that the Danes have got the same coloring as Targaryens. This is just one of those things in life that some families look a bit like other families. So no, I don't think that they are. I think you're entirely right. It just makes sense. So why on earth would Viserys not mention it if she wasn't who she was supposed to be? He will certainly remember. There's absolutely no reason to suggest that there's anything mysterious going on here whatsoever. So yeah, I think this is not so much a red herring actually as a literary device for Barristan Selmy to start thinking about Ashara Dane and therefore start thinking about things like the Tony at Harrenhal, because actually we're now down to only a few characters who can start reminiscing about what might have happened at the Tony at Harrenhal or the Tower of Joy or anything along those lines. So when George R. R. Martin has got a chance from a POV character to just drop a few little bits in there, I think he uses it. And you can't just have a character randomly just going along and go, oh, I remember 20 years ago at the tourney at Harrenhal when such a... There has to be some sort of hook for the thinking to go that way. And the hook is that Daenerys and Ashara Dane both had the same color eyes. So I think it's simply a literary device taking us there.
And one other thing I just wanted to comment that I kind of thought of as you were talking, I think what might be interesting is Barristan was in love with Ashara, and he also, I think, feels some guilt about her death, because he has in one of his chapters, he talks about how, would she have lived if she had looked to me instead of Stark? If we had gotten together, maybe I could have kept her from dying or something like that. Even though he couldn't have done anything in being part of the Kingsguard, but whatever. I guess he's a little bit of a romantic. But I just wonder if he thinks Daenerys kind of looks like Ashara, if that makes him feel more protective of her and more kind of loyal and bound to her, and so that he might stay and support her, even if he questions some of her decisions, just because of that connection.
Yeah, I think that's entirely right. I think what we're seeing here is an old man remembering someone that he loved from afar in his youth, and it brings out. I think let's go with protective. That's probably the slightly less seedy way of putting it. Protective feelings in him towards her.
Unlike Jorah.
Yeah, Jorah is the slightly more seedy. Let's go with that one. Maura Lee says, it has been discussed before that Dany's fate will be similar in the books, that Jon will probably be the one to kill her like he did on the show. When in the timeline do you think this will happen? We're getting onto the big questions here. Will this happen before or after the scouring of the Shire bit with Cersei and Euron? Now, I don't know, Vanessa, how up to speed you are with the sort of the scouring the Shire theories, but why don't we start with I'll happily talk about that in just a moment. Why don't we start with, do you think that Jon will kill Daenerys in the books?
I mean, I don't want it to happen, but I think it would be difficult to think that that's something they just made up if George told them the endpoints and the big plot beats, that they would just, oh, well, let's not go with that. Let's just have Jon kill her instead, because that looks way better. Not really. So I think that they wouldn't have just done that on their own. The circumstances may be different. What I struggle with is kind of the order of events, because there's so much that got left out of the show that it's going to have a huge impact, I think, on those plot lines, and it's just really hard to predict how this is going to come about. But yeah, I mean, I think it will happen that way.
Yeah, I think I agree with that. Just on a couple of points, just I saw in the chat, Nicola Jurican saying, "Do you still support Howland and Ashara theory?" Yes, I do. It's my favourite nearly tinfoil theory in that I can't prove it, but it fits so well. And then there was another point I was going to pick up on, but not to worry, I'll come back to this one. So the scouring of the Shire, I think someone was asking about the scouring of the Shire. This is something George R. R. Martin has talked about the ending of Game of Thrones or A Song of Ice and Fire, how he wants the feel of it to be like the penultimate chapter in the Lord of the Rings, which is the scouring of the Shire, which at a very high level, I talked about this in a bit more detail last time, but at a very high level, it's after the big battle, after the big issues have been resolved. The heroes go back home, as it were, to the Shire in the Lord of the Rings, and face another battle that is against like the sort of the secondary baddie, and they have to get rid of them before they can start rebuilding the world and that they have been fighting so hard to save. And that is the feel of that George R. R. Martin is trying to capture. So transplanting that across to A Song of Ice and Fire, it seems likely that what we saw in broad outlines, what we saw on the show, which is like the battle against the army of the dead, the threat of the others, will be dealt with first, and then we're going to have a longer than we might expect period after that, when the heroes, as it were, have to face off against a secondary kind of villain who, in my sort of mental canon, is going to be Euron and Cersei. So that is what I think sort of the final iteration bit of that going on there. I think Jon will kill Daenerys. I've thought that for a while. I did a video on this like a couple of years ago, which was based on an interpretation of Dany's visions in the books in the House of the Undying that I went through an incredibly what felt at the time convoluted chain of logic, which brought me out at the conclusion that Jon would kill Daenerys, and it would be a sort of an echo of the kind of the Nissa kind of thing. Now, so I think that it probably will happen. I think that the context won't be exactly the same, but the characters are the same, and so we have to ask what on earth would drive Jon to kill Daenerys. And I think that there are only a couple of things that could possibly do that, one of which is some sort of version of, Daenerys is doing things that Jon disapproves of, which is what happened on the show. And the second one is that Jon thinks that this is a sacrifice. He hates it, but it's a sacrifice which is necessary to achieve a greater good, which is the kind of the Azor Ahai theory. So I think there's only two possible ways that this could happen. I think it will happen. I don't think it will happen in the exact same way it happened on the show. But I'm going to be doing a whole series of videos starting in the autumn, going over a few months until we get the Winds of Winter, he says, fingers crossed, about what I think is likely to be happening based on what we've had so far in the books, and also some of the hints we've had on the show about what is likely to be the sort of the iteration of events coming up in the next couple of books. So I will get onto that in a little bit more detail. But this does tie into Anime Lover. This is the question that you were talking about, whether Dany will marry in the books, and who do you expect it to be? Now, Dany's obviously already got a bit of a marriage history in the books, but what do you think? What do you think will be her marital situation going forward in the books?
I personally think that she will marry Jon if the show's accurate and she has a relationship with him. I don't see why they wouldn't get married. I don't know why it didn't happen in the show. I thought it was kind of silly that they never did, especially with Jon, constantly thinking about he never wanted to father a bastard. He questioned her ability to have children, said maybe, the witch who told you, something that actually didn't even occur in the show because she never said that line. But maybe she was wrong and you can actually have kids. And if he thinks that, why would he then have sex with her and think he might father a bastard, because he's always against that kind of thing. So I think it was very strange that they never got married in the show. And I think for political purposes, it makes a lot of sense. They even said that, and then they had that silly line about, she'll just control him. He's not strong enough to stand up to her, or something, which I thought was kind of ridiculous. But anyway, but no, I think, and reading Fire and Blood made me think it even more, because in the latter part of the book, when Aegon III becomes king, his sisters Rhaena and Baela, who are very much Sansa and Arya kind of prototypes, they're described very similarly to the Stark sisters. They bring in Daenerys Velaryon to as a kind of he has this like ball to find a new bride, kind of like a Cinderella. It's very Cinderella-esque. But they bring in Daenerys Targaryen, who's got the Valyrian looks, and she's the one he chooses, and so there's a lot of theorizing that Aegon III is a kind of a parallel to Jon in a lot of ways, and so I that made me think that there could be very much a political match if even if they don't fall in love, it would make sense before he finds out his heritage. If he becomes king in the North, there is a lot of good reason that they would make a good political match, bringing the North and the loyal Targaryen supporters together, especially when they're getting ready to fight the White Walkers' army of the dead. So I definitely think it's a high possibility.
Yeah, I think so too. I mean, she is. People have pointed out in the chat she is already married in the books to Hisdar, so she's on her second marriage already.
He's not going to last long.
I would agree with that completely. So he's not. He's a very shady character. He wasn't that nice on the show, and he's definitely. I would agree. He's not going to last long when she returns, or he may even go before that. When she gets it, for me, the only issue about marriage is timing, because whenever people talk about we've got lots to go in, but we've got 2 books to come. They're going to be big books, but we have to remember that Daenerys still has to come to deal with the Dothraki, come back to Meereen, deal with that issue, then work her way across, perhaps via Pentos, because she's got, I think, Barristan's trying to get her there, then across to
Atlantis,
deal with
maybe too.
exactly. Then she's got to get across to King's Landing, deal with whatever's happening there. Then, of course, she might have to turn her attention to the north, and that's even before she meets Jon Snow. So it felt rushed on the show, their relationship, but actually in the books, unless George spins it out even longer, don't rule it out, people, but actually it's still going to be a long time, probably not even the next book before they meet. So whatever relationship they have will be probably in the last book or starting at the very end of the Winds of Winter. It's not going to be this long drawn out thing. It is going to be quite swift. And so the issue is whether or not simply there will be time for them to get married. I think that's the only sort of question I have about it. I think the relationship is more important than the actual marital status going on there. Let's go to another question. This was from Maura Lee again, saying, what do you see Dany's role will be in the battle with the others? So again, this is one of the sort of the big questions. So first of all, can I just check whether I think we're on the same page that she's broadly going to be, yes, she might make a few pit stops along the way, but broadly she's going to come across to sort of Westeros, launch her invasion, and at some point she will get engaged in a battle with the others. What do you think she's going to be doing there?
It's tough to say because we know so little about the others, and I mean we know some of what supposedly kills them, but I find it hard to believe that objects made with dragon fire can kill the whites and the others, but dragon fire itself can't kill them. And so I think the dragons may be more important than they were in the show. I don't know why they downplayed Daenerys and Jon's role in that fight, because I think we've been led to believe that they're going to have a much more significant role to play than they did in that episode. So, and I also think the fight's going to be a lot more drawn out and take up a lot more space than just one night. So I think the dragons are going to be important. I think there's been too many hints and clues in the books that foreshadow that they will be, and it's necessary to have them. I mean, Jon thinks about it would be nice to have a dragon or 3 at the wall. There are some other clues I can't remember off the top of my head, but oh yeah, Daenerys having that dream about melting soldiers armored in ice at the Trident, melting them away. So I think the dragons are going to be instrumental. I don't think the fight's going to necessarily end in the north. I think the others are going to invade and cover a lot more of the continent than what they did in the show. And so, without having those dragons and her army, I think they would have much less of a chance of winning. So whether or not she does something even more important or magical, I don't know. But, like I said, just having the dragons, I think is going to be huge.
Yeah, I think I would agree. So my general take is that my new take on this is I wonder whether Daenerys will go north at all. I think that you talked about the vision she had of like fighting the Trident, which is clearly just a bit north from King's Landing, and also around close to this area, which seems to be the heart of things: the Isle of Faces, Harrenhal, the Inn at the Crossroads, Ruby Ford, and things like that. We know that the Isle of Faces is going to be important. Because George R. R. Martin has said so. He said he mentioned it in book 1 when he thought he was just doing a trilogy, and then realized when it was going to be a longer story than that he probably mentioned it a bit too much too early, which is why it all went a bit silent in later books about the Isle of Faces. But there will be things happening in the Isle of Faces. I personally suspect that the ending of that confrontation with the others will happen in around that area, around the Isle of Faces. And so perhaps Daenerys just gets up that far. There was more in Fire and Blood. Now, I was just having a quick look to see whether I could find it. I'm sure I heard someone say that George R. R. Martin at the event he did in London last week, he was talking about wanting to get Fire and Blood out before the Winds of Winter. Partly because of some sorts of, I don't think he actually said because of foreshadowing, but that was the kind of the hint that was there. There were some things that we should probably be slightly aware of. There were things like the obvious stuff like Silverwing and sort of not going north of the Wall and stuff like that. But also there is more detail on a battle between 2 dragons above the God's Eye Lake, which is exactly the kind of thing that you might expect to see if the Army of the Dead got that far south. So I could certainly see Daenerys on Drogon coming up against sort of Viserion in an undead version of Viserion, and then them effectively taking each other out. I could certainly see that as a possibility. So I think she will be important in the fight, but I think that the key that they tried to show on the show, I don't think they were very successful in doing it, is the fact that the White Walkers, the others, it's not a matter of killing them. This is not where George R. R. Martin's story is going to end. He's a pacifist. He's this great story of how power corrupts, how war is bad. This is not going to end with "and the biggest and best army won." That's not where he's going to go. This is about undoing the magic in some way. And I think they tried to show this on the show with this idea that when they were explaining it, they said the reason why the Night King died was because he was created in front of a weirwood tree with dragon glass in his heart, and to uncreate him, he had to be in front of a weirwood tree with Valyrian steel in his heart. Whether you buy that or not, that was clearly what they were trying to say, was that this was an undoing of magic, not just killing the big baddie. And I think that is the key to what happens. And Daenerys is not necessarily in and of herself sat on a dragon shooting fire at things. That is not undoing magic. That is trying to take it on by power of force. So that's my slight tweak on this, is that I think that the denouement is more about undoing the magic, which I think will be more about the Isle of Faces than just about killing things with dragons. Okay, so let's we're about halfway through, at which point I normally just ask my guests just to say if there's anything that you'd like to particularly draw people's attention to that you've got coming up. I saw, Vanessa, you had some sort of art sale or something going on. Is that still happening?
Yeah, so I had a booth at Con of Thrones back in July, and so I had some leftover merchandise. So I've got that on my website. You can go there and check it out. It's I've marked everything down. Just I don't have space for it in my house, so if anyone wants anything, please, I would love to free up some room. And then I don't know if you guys listen to our podcast for Watchers on the Wall, the Night's Cast. We have a 3-part series that we're doing, talking about some of the histories around the Age of Heroes and the first Long Night, with the prequel that's currently in development. They just finished filming the pilot. They're working on post-production, and hopefully we'll find out that HBO greenlights that, and we'll get a first season getting to start filming. So we just wanted to cover some of the lore and the history that we know, to see what we might actually see on screen if they do go ahead with that. So check us out over at the Night's Cast.
Excellent. And I'm sure if you're watching live, somebody will drop a link in the chat for that as well. We had Sam Sansa Snark on last week, who was giving us a bit of an update on timings on the prequel. I often collaborate with you on Westworld. This is a Game of Thrones live stream, so we'll be talking about Game of Thrones, but just very briefly, where are we at in terms of sort of when can we expect season 3 of Westworld?
My personal opinion is that they will probably air it in April so that it kind of takes over Game of Thrones' old spot. That would be my guess. I think did it start in April for season 2, I believe?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. So they're finishing filming in October. So that would give them a few months to do all of the post-production work, and then I think April would be a good target date for it.
Yeah, I think that if they're finishing in October, they could rush it for January. HBO seem to go for the big things are sort of summer, April or January.
Yeah.
So I think that they could rush it to get it out in January, but it makes sense, I think, to go for that April slot, particularly if the prequel is not going to appear until, say, April 2021, which is entirely possible. In terms of,
and I think for season 2 filming, when they were filming season 2, I think they finished on October. When they finished season 2, I think they finished filming in October for that as well. So, or maybe it was a little bit later, but I think April is definitely doable, and it looks like they've done a good bit of work with some of the footage that we've seen in the trailers. So, yeah, it's possible.
Yeah, I mean, so I think that's right. I'm gonna gamble on April, and I think that we will see, because Westworld happens roughly every 2 years. I think we'll see the year after that will be the prequel spin-off, Game of Thrones spin-off. In terms of stuff happening on my channel, I've got The Well Told Tale, for those who don't know, is my second channel, which is my audio narration channel. We're currently working our way through At the Mountains of Madness, which is an H.P. Lovecraft tale in the sort of the world of Cthulhu. So if you like audiobooks, I do one episode per week every Wednesday. I try and do it long form, uninterrupted by adverts, so it's averaging something like 45 minutes per episode. If you're interested in that, The Well Told Tale, there's a link down in the description. I also always say at this point, thank you to my patrons. I honestly cannot do what I do without your support, so thank you so much. I really do appreciate it. If you're at all interested in supporting the channel, or if you want to get access to some extra stuff I do just for my patrons, then there is a link down in the description below to my Patreon page. So let's get back to some questions. We had where were we up to? Question about Drogon and the dragons. So, what do you think? Or actually, before this, because we kind of skated over it, and I'd be interested in your view. Um, in terms of sort of the iteration of events with Daenerys coming across, we've got in the books, we've got this other invasion, of course, which is already underway, which is depending on your perspective, this is either Aegon the Sixth, the rightful king of Westeros, or this is Fagon, a Blackfire pretender, or whatever. But whoever, we've got this character who's claiming to be Aegon Targaryen, who has got the Golden Company, and is currently in the Stormlands and is going to start looking towards King's Landing soon. Now, my take is that roughly what's going to happen is that they will attack King's Landing. They've already got Varys on the inside, sowing discontent and discord and making life easier for them. They will get in there. I suspect Dawn will join forces with them. It wouldn't surprise me if someone like the Hightowers joins in with them as well. I suspect that they will suddenly find that they've got the Sword Dawn and the Sword Blackfire both magically appear with them. Not magically, but people will bring them there. And I think people will like this Targaryen ruler. And so I think it is going to be him who is going to be in power in King's Landing when Daenerys finally arrives over. Do you think that that is likely, or do you think that it will be Cersei that Daenerys is going to be facing?
Yeah, I don't think it's going to be Cersei. I think Fagon will defeat Cersei and who will take King's Landing, but I don't think she'll die yet. I think she'll maybe flee to Casterly Rock. I see her lasting for a while longer. I think in the show, I definitely think they flipped events around to keep Lena Headey on as long as possible. Because they're not going to get rid of her by like episode 2 and then just focus on the White Walkers for the rest of the season. They're just not going to do that. They love her. So I do think that Daenerys will probably hit King's Landing, which will be controlled by Fagon at the time. And I do think that's going to happen before the fight against the others. With how much material is left to cover, I just find it difficult to believe that she would just leave him be, and then because I don't even think the other invasion is going to happen maybe by the end of the Winds of Winter. Maybe it might even be pushed to the last book. So I would find it very difficult to believe that she wouldn't deal with that threat for another book or book and a half, or so that's my take on it. I do think King's Landing will burn. I think it will be fighting Fagon. The whole bells thing, there's a lot of bells imagery tied up with Jon Connington, who's kind of leading the invasion of Aegon. And so I think there might be something going on with that. I think there may be some wildfire set off, probably accidentally. I think she will definitely intentionally use dragons, but I don't think the destruction of the city will be entirely her fault, because she may not be aware of all the wildfire that's there and may accidentally set it off, or it may be intentionally triggered just to, make her look bad. I don't know. Tyrion's going to be a big influencer too, because he kind of has an axe to grind, one against his family and two against the people of King's Landing because of how he was treated during his trial and in the wake of Joffrey's death. So I could definitely see him pushing her to go all fire and blood, and I don't think it will be quite the Tyrion that we saw in the show. And I don't remember the other question that we had about that.
I mean, I was just it was basically about the iteration. I'll come back to the other question in a moment. Okay. I think I agree with you. I think the other thing that I would add in is the possibility of there being some outbreak of disease or possibly even grayscale, because Jon Connington's coming across. He's got grayscale, and there are lots of stories in Fire and Blood about what you do when you get sort of like, and not just in Fire and Blood actually, but through the histories of King's Landing and Old Town, of what do you do when you have a city where there's an outbreak of some horrible disease. And the answer generally is you put it on lockdown and you kill lots of people, which is very harsh and is not going to win you the love of the people, but it will probably get rid of the disease. And so I do wonder if another factor in this, I think you're entirely right about the wildfire hidden. If something, if there is any dragonfire going on, there's a fair chance that might set off something that you're not expecting it to. But I think that there could also be kind of a cleansing element to what's going on here that is not a popular cleansing element. The sort of the we'll get on to the other questions. So I'll kind of leap forward and I'll come back to that one. So do you think then that is the burning of King's Landing that we saw on the show? Because I think, like you, I kind of work on the assumption George R. Martin's been sort of clear that the big beats of the story are the same on the show in the books, and by the sort of the big beats, I think we can be reasonably clear. This is the Jon killing Dany and Dany burning King's Landing, or something along those lines. That do you think that is the context for her? Well, first of all, do you think that she will burn King's Landing? And secondly, do you think that will be the context rather than what we had on the show, which they explained as being this sort of build-up of all the bad things going on in her head, and she just had to sort of let rip effectively? Do you think that the context will be this first invasion or after what happens with the others?
As far as burning King's Landing, I tend to think it's going to happen when she first comes over and has to deal with Aegon. George has already said there's going to be a second Dance with the Dragon, so that's probably not going to be the end of it. I think it's going to be more protracted than that. But he's been building up to this conflict with the others since the prologue of the first book. And I just can't imagine he's going to dispatch that fight really quickly and then focus on the Dance of the Dragons after that. I don't see it. I think he would be more interested in telling a story where we have this prolonged Dance of the Dragons. It causes a lot of death and destruction. Westeros it's already been ravaged by the War of the Five Kings. And then you have this other war come along and tear it apart even further and devastate it even more. And then this invasion of these ice zombies come at its absolute lowest point. You've had all of these wars. You've had maybe a sickness outbreak or grayscale. And then they have to try and deal with this other threat that finally comes down after being so devastated by all the other things that have come. I think that's a much more interesting story to me. So I do think the burning of King's Landing will come first. I think if Jon does end up having to kill her, it's going to be in a different context. It's not going to be because she just destroyed a city. My personal theory, and I would rather her die as a self-sacrifice and fighting the others. Like, I would rather see that happen for her because, obviously I love the character. But if it is because of her, like, embracing her and her conqueror, but knowing the fact that she still has this strong streak of wanting to free people, and maybe that gets corrupted and she sees everyone as slaves. Like, she tells Jon, like, we need to free all the people of Westeros because everyone's under someone's thumb, which is not entirely wrong. The way she wants to go about it isn't necessarily the best way. But what I could see, especially in the books, there's so much prophecy and so many people think that she is this, like, Messiah savior that's been prophesied to save the world, especially the Red Priests of her lore. They're going to have a hand in, like, kind of pushing her to fulfill her destiny. She has all these prophetic dreams. She has Quaithe. So she has been pushed and prodded into accepting this kind of messianic role. And I think that if they have this fight against the others and they win and she's, plays a big part in that, maybe that pushes her even farther into this role of a messiah, and she thinks, well, I just saved the world and now I've got to go save, like, everyone. I've got to continue this liberation. Like, it's not just liberating people from these, like, death slavers. I've got to free people everywhere. And so it could be similar to the kind of speech that she gave in the finale, but just not like directly after destroying a city. It could be after triumphing over death. And so she has this inflated sense of her importance and believes she needs to go liberate the rest of the world. And everyone else is kind of like, whoa, wait, this is probably not a good idea. I could see it being something more like that than what we saw in the finale.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think I agree. I would love her to die heroically somewhere, but that's not going to happen. I don't think. I think Jon is going to kill her, and it will be tragic. I'm currently, as I say, I'm going to have a proper think about all of these things before doing my videos on it. I'm currently thinking that yes, that the burning of King's Landing happens first. With her invasion. So one of the other things that came out in the Visions in the House of the Undying is this idea that she is going to sort of reveal the Mama's dragon. Aegon the Sixth, Aegon, reveal the falsehood of who he is, and that I think is going to be a hint that she's going to be deposing him and showing that he's not a true Targaryen. And I think part of this is going to be her getting him out of the way, at which point suddenly she's going to have to like face this matter, the matter of, if I'm going to be Queen of the Seven Kingdoms, actually suddenly half of them are being taken over by these ice zombies, and so she then has to go up and try and take on them. I think that's the point at which Cersei and Euron take King's Landing. There's also, and I've not thought this one through completely, but there's also a possibility that Euron might get control of a dragon, and if Euron gets control of a dragon, then Daenerys is not going to be happy. So you could certainly see some collateral damage going on there. So there's plenty of possibilities for it. I think that you're very right in terms of the advice, I would say, that she's getting. Moqorro is very much going to be there, geeing her on, wanting her to use as much fire as possible, wanting her to be facing down the others as quickly as possible. And generally, Targaryens don't work well when there are people geeing them on to be using more fire and blood, because that's where they naturally would want to be going. That's their house motto, that's their general feeling. And as we've seen with Daenerys, she's already got Quaithe speaking in her ear, trying to push her down that path. So I think that the advisors thing is going to be very much more important, which isn't to say that Book Dany is more easily persuaded by other people. I don't think that's necessarily the case, but I think that she will find herself being pushed by people in various directions to an extent that didn't happen so much on the show. But let's talk about the dragons, and let's talk about Drogon. Now, my take on Drogon, this is the question I was saying from Maura Lee about what happens with Drogon. My take on the dragons is I do not think that the dragons will, at the end of the books, as on the end of the show, the dragons will not be on Westeros anymore. I think that they will either be killed or they will have gone away in some way. Now, I think it makes complete sense for two of them to die and then the third one to sort of fly off mysteriously somewhere, perhaps towards Valyria. That seems like a very kind of Drogon thing to be doing. What's your take on it? Do you think that we are going to have dragons surviving to the end of the books? And if so, which ones, where and how and why?
Yeah, I think before season 8, I would have said they were all going to die. I think it's possible that maybe one survives. I think Drogon would be a good bet. But I think even if they all die, there might be still some dragon eggs laying around somewhere. They may have maybe laid a new clutch of them, as we don't know the sex of the dragons, and supposedly they can change sex depending on their environment anyway, if it's necessary. And I wouldn't be surprised if they bred and produced some eggs at some point in the next couple of books. So I kind of like that idea. I don't even if the dragons die and supposedly magic is gone, I see George still laying that seed that like it could possibly come back. So, even if the dragons are dead, there's still some eggs that maybe might hatch one day. So I think, like I said, I think we might get rid of the fire magic, but there will be a possibility it could return.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense to me. I think that the Drogon going away towards Valyria kind of works for me. Fire and Blood, we get Balerion, who appears to just automatically go there, and the Drogon is very much the echo of Balerion the Black Dread. It's in the coloring, it's in the personality, it's in the dragon flame color. They're very much the echo and in the same way that we had Aegon the Conqueror, the first Targaryen ruler of Westeros, who was on Balerion the Black Dread, and used Balerion the Black Dread to be forging the Iron Throne. It works for me that this kind of gets bookended by Daenerys being the last Targaryen ruler of the Seven Kingdoms, however short her main reign may be, who Drogon will unforge or uncreate the Iron Throne. So that kind of works for me. What didn't work for me, I have to say, was Drogon just burning the Iron Throne because it happened to be in the way. For those who saw the scripts that they released the script for season 8, for season 8, episode 6, and it made clear that the showrunners had got Drogon firing flame at the Iron Throne simply because it was in the way, not because their words were just a dumb bystander. That doesn't work for me at all, I have to say. I think that Drogon would have realized what the Iron Throne was, but I do like the idea that Drogon will destroy the Iron Throne, perhaps from above during a flyover. That's still the way that I think works best for me. But what do you think about the Iron? Do you think that Drogon will, in the books, will destroy the Iron Throne?
Yeah, I could definitely see that. Whether or not it happens during the burning of King's Landing or if it's on purpose. What I would have liked to see is in the show, and maybe it could happen in the books, is Daenerys having him do it on purpose. Especially, because in the show she's so focused on liberating people and from oppression, and it has been a symbol of oppression. I mean, it wasn't just her family that sat on it. Cersei ruled from that. She disagreed with Robert Baratheon's rule and thought he was a horrible king. So I could see her maybe doing it on purpose, just as this symbol has oppressed people for too long and it needs to go. Even if she thinks she's going to rule Westeros, maybe she would think she needed to build a new throne for a new era. That would make sense to me. And yeah, I agree. I really didn't like that. Oh, it just happened to be there, so it got burned. It was very, very odd. But
Yeah,
I like the idea that it happens on purpose.
Yeah, I there was a lot I didn't like about that script, and I went on a mini rant about it on Twitter, but I'm not going to go into all of that now. I don't personally, I don't buy the idea that Dany might get Drogon to destroy it. I think that we've seen nothing so far in the books that suggests that she sees the Iron Throne as a problem in some way, or that she has to start again in some way. I think that she sees what she's doing as reclaiming something and continuing the Targaryen rule, which would require the sort of the symbols of Targaryen rule. And if she doesn't have the sword Blackfire or Dark Sister out there, but she hasn't got them, and there are many different crowns that the Targaryen kings used, so there isn't just a specific crown as a symbol. Then I think that having the Iron Throne is the biggest symbol of the Targaryen rule, so I think that she would want to keep it. I could see, however, Drogon destroying it, yes, sort of accidentally, but not in just a kind of a blind rage burning things, but actually in just doing a fly pass over King's Landing or something along those lines. That works a bit better for me. But we have a couple of technical questions.
One thing real quick. I was just going to say, if she happens to learn more about her family history and not just the fairy tales that she was told by Viserys, if she learned some of like the real actual history and some of the horrible things that her family had done, then she might change her mind, and that might prompt her to want to do it. And the other thing is, if she thinks she's going to rule in Marine, she has just a simple bench that she sits on. She doesn't have some elaborate throne, and so I think she might want to have something else rather than that elaborate throne to sit on. I don't know, just a possibility.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not discounting it. I like the idea from the perspective of her being different. What I can't yet see is the sort of the, and this might be because it's not started yet, it might start in the Winds of Winter, is the kind of the trail of who is actually going to be telling her that, you know what, your family weren't always great, because she's surrounded by lots of different voices, but to me, most of them are either egging her on to be more Targaryen-y or actually trying to be quite diplomatic. Barristan Selmy is always being slightly diplomatic about, you know, Rhaegar and all the rest of it. He's always on the verge of saying something, and then she like cuts him short or something like that. And it's never, she doesn't actually have many people who are telling her the unvarnished truth. Jorah does a little bit, but not rubbishing her family's name in any way. She's never had anyone who's been doing that. But yeah, anyway, I think it's just I think it makes sense that Drogon does it. It's just a matter of how and why, as far as I'm concerned. Dan Almeida, thank you so much for the super chat, saying, will Dany be able to ride all 3 dragons, or is she only bonded with Drogon? If so, how do the others know what she wants of them? The other dragons, that is. Love your vid so much. Well, thank you very much for that. In terms of the bonding thing, yeah, it does seem to be just a one Targaryen or one dragon rider bonds with one dragon. Now, dragons, so that's why she's got this kind of bond going on with Drogon. She can't just hop onto one of the other dragons and start flying it around. It doesn't work like that. But they are intelligent creatures. They're not just like dumb animals. They do kind of understand what she's doing, and they can figure out what they want to do. And although there isn't a bond there, clearly she has brought them up. She fed them and all the rest of it. So there is a link there, even if it's not this kind of direct dragon riding bond. But what do you reckon, Vanessa? Do you think that there's a chance that she could ride any of the other dragons, or do you think they'll be for other people?
Yeah, I think they'll be for other people. I think we even get a line saying that dragon riders don't ever ride another dragon, but dragons can accept other riders. But once a person bonds to a dragon, they never ride another one. It's just that one. I think that's what we got in the books. So I don't see that happening. I do think Jon will ride Rhaegal. I think that's something the show gave us that will happen in the books. As for Viserion, I still like the idea that Tyrion rides a dragon with maybe Bran helping him do it somehow.
Tyrion Targaryen, obviously.
Yeah. But I mean, he just, even if that isn't true, just the fact that he has dreamed about them and fantasized about having a dragon for so long, I would love to see him ride one.
Yeah, I mean, I would love to see him ride one too. And I've said before that out of all of the tinfoil theories, Tyrion Targaryen is the one that honestly I change my mind on the most. There are some days when I'm reading about something else, and then I suddenly see Tyrion having a random dragon dream, and I go, "Oh, he has dragon dreams," and he was fascinated about dragons as a child, and there's all the hints there that maybe the echoes between him and Jon and Daenerys about them mothers dying in childbirth and all the rest of it, and I go, "Oh, there's a kind of a thematic link between them," and I'm all in favor of this. And then another time I completely flip over and go to the other way and say, actually, the irony there about him really being the trueborn son of Tywin Lannister, and actually he's very like Tywin in a way that both of his other children aren't, and it's the one that flip-flop on the most, I have to say. But I'm coming down to the conclusion that I suspect we will never actually know for certain on this
I agree.
one.
I think George will keep it a secret. And then that's fine.
Exactly.
I kind of like it that way.
Yeah, and that's the same. And my gut instinct is that I think you're right with so Drogon and Dany is a bond, and dragons can have more than one rider. It's just that riders don't have more than one dragon, so it does work that way around. But then they're not at the same time. So if Dany did die, then somebody else in time could bond with Drogon, but it doesn't. It doesn't work the other way around. So the what was I going to say? Yeah, so Jon and Rhaegal, I think I agree completely. It works so much, named after Rhaegar, Jon's true father. So that for me works perfectly, and will be further proof of his Targaryen heritage. The one named after Viserion, named after Viserys. Viserys, obviously not the best of characters, and I think that this is a hint that the bonding to Viserion will be with a character that we do not particularly like, which means that I think that there are two possibilities here. I think one of them is what we saw on the show, or an equivalent of it, that the others get their undead dragon, which works for me thematically, because then you get the three dragon riders. You get the one Dany representing fire, you get one represent Viserion representing ice, and then you get Jon, who is thematically ice and fire, riding the third, as well as obviously still having Ghost, his direwolf. So that kind of thematically works for me. But the other option, as I said, is I think Euron, who is going to be a much bigger character in the books than he was on the show. So that's where I'm at. I still think at least two, if not three, of the dragons are going to die. It would not surprise me if we get Viserion and Rhaegal effectively taking each other out over the God's Eye Lake. I don't think we're going to see Rhaegal chopped down by crossbow bolts from a navy everybody forgot about. I don't think we're going to see that happening in the books.
And then Jon didn't even care.
And then Jon didn't even. Well, I'm not going to dwell on that one. I don't think that's going to happen in the books. Although I should probably just say, as a rule of thumb, if something stupid happens on the show, it's because there's something that they just haven't covered in the books, and so they just had to do a shortcut in order to make things right. They could not have two dragons at the end of Game of Thrones on Dany's side, because that wasn't going to work. They needed to be just Drogon, for reasons that are probably going to become apparent in the books. And so they had to come up with some way for Rhaegal to die, and that way appeared to be Jon not riding Rhaegal, and for them to have a surprise attack on the fleet. So that was just them trying to tidy things up, so they ended up just with one dragon, because that's what they got told, is at the end there's just Drogon. So the speculation, I think, is how actually does Rhaegal die, and I still like this idea of a Dance of the Dragons fight over the God's Eye Lake. That seems to be the hints that George R. R. Martin has been sort of trying to drop in the things that he's been writing about outside of the core story. Vampirus99, thank you so much for the super chat, saying, I have a theory that Drogon dies during the Battle for the Dawn and Rhaegal survives to fly away. Okay, so this is another take on it. Do you think there's a possibility that Rhaegal might survive?
I mean, it's possible. I think it's really kind of a coin toss as to if any of them survive, which one it will be. But I feel like if Daenerys survives the battles that she's in, because she is a dragon rider, it seems difficult for me to think that Drogon's going to get shot down and killed out of the sky with her on his back and survive, especially if her endpoint is really Jon killing her. That leads me to believe that Drogon is going to survive the battles, and so if he dies, it would be someone purposely killing him afterwards. And so I don't know, but that's just my gut feeling, is that if one survives, it would be him.
Yeah.
Kind of like Balerion the Black Dread died of old age, and he's kind of the closest parallel we have to Drogon, because, the coloring and they were the biggest, and so I could see that.
Yeah. I think I agree. I think I agree with that. I think that the most likely is that Drogon's going to survive, and I actually quite liked. I wasn't sure about it at the time, but I actually quite like in hindsight him flying off eastwards. That fits with the kind of the Balerian kind of imagery that we have going on there. Just in the chat, I spotted something that Layla Azmi Gushi says, I can't accept the show's end, which had a good versus evil message. In A Song of Ice and Fire, many characters and families have notorious pasts. It's hard to say violence and madness is exclusive to Targaryens. Yeah, I think this is a really important point. It's not just the Targaryens that are sort of the ones with a sort of a... They're not just the baddies. And this isn't, in the books, this isn't a good versus evil fight, nor is it a living versus the dead fight. That was how they tried to set it up on the show, because they're going to be dead on both sides of this, or every side. It's not just going to be like one side against the other. It's going to be a very complicated set of confrontations across the whole piece. And I think George R. R. Martin is trying to take us to the next level up, and not just say that this is good guys against bad guys, the good guys will win, the bad guys will lose. This is saying actually the confrontation, the battles, the struggle for power itself, that is the bad thing that we have to be dealing with here, and you can see all the consequences of it. And so I think he's going to take it to the next level and say there are no actual purely good heroes here. A couple of people sort of verge on it, people like Brienne or Davos or Sam, they kind of head towards that, but generally speaking, everybody is some sort of shade of grey in this world. And I think George R. R. Martin is trying to show us that actually this isn't about good versus evil. This is about the bad thing is the struggle for power itself. So yeah, sorry, just a small digression onto that point there.
I agree. And I just wanted to say really quickly, if Jon does end up killing Daenerys, I think it's going to be I think we're going to be much more conflicted about it in the books. I think it's going to be a much more morally gray moment where you're not really sure if it's the right thing. And I think I think that really sets up Jon being very tortured over it. Whereas in the show, it was really pretty black and white.
It was, yeah. I think, yeah, I agree completely with that. Actually, it's on the show, it was like Tyrion was just trying to convince him that yes, I know you love her, but really she's Hitler. So that was basically the conversation that they were having. And then at the end of it, you all just thought, okay, of course it's not good, not nice, but he did the right thing. I think that George R. R. Martin, and I've made this point in lots of different contexts, he cares not so much about the truth of something like a prophecy or somebody's or a vision or any of the kind of like the things that drive people. What he cares about is how people react to them. And so what we're going to see with Jon is how he reacts to various things which push him to this outcome of killing Daenerys. And I think I would agree completely, it's not just going to be she's now clearly a bad person, you should kill her. He's going to have conflicting reasons for doing something, and we will look back on it and go, well, did he have to do that? Maybe not necessarily, probably. And I think it will be a debate that we'll be having going forward about whether or not that actually was necessary, rather than what they set the season 8 up as a kind of a classical tragedy where they put the pieces in place in episode 2 and 3, and after that everything just happened quite inevitably the moment that it became known that Jon was a Targaryen, the moment that we discovered that he wouldn't be able to deal with being with Daenerys, given the fact that she was his aunt. The moment all of these things were in place, then it all just became very inevitable about what was actually going to happen at the end. As I say, classic tragedy, whereas George R. R. Martin's style is not just set up all the pieces and it all has to follow logically on from that, but it's actually a much more complicated solution that we will be debating where the good and right is in all of this.
Totally agree.
Okay, we've got just a couple more questions from my patrons, so we'll come to them. If there are any other questions in the chat, now is the time to be dropping them into there. But let's go with a question about, well, just the simple question, I think, Vanessa. We've been sort of talking in around this idea of that she's going to take King's Landing. Will she burn it? What's going to happen? Do you think, given the fact that this is one of her clear drives, do you think that she will end up sitting on the Iron Throne or actually being the ruler of the Seven Kingdoms? Or do you think that she will, as on the show, she will get there within touching distance of the Iron Throne and actually never really being ruler? What do you think?
It's tough to say. I think it really just depends on the fight with Aegon and how and whether or not that wraps up before the fight against the others. If she's able to defeat him before she goes on to fight the Army of the Dead, then I would assume she would be the nominal head of the Seven Kingdoms. I mean, maybe she doesn't actually get to rule from King's Landing and sit the throne, but I believe she would declare herself the queen of Westeros. Because Cersei, like I said, would probably have fled by that point. And I mean, maybe she would try and call herself a queen still, but I don't think anyone would really believe that she had any power left. So yeah, it's difficult to say. And like with the destruction of the throne, it doesn't happen when Daenerys attacks King's Landing, because if it does, then it may be destroyed before she even gets a chance to land and sit on it. But I mean, I kind of, my own personal feelings, I would like for her to. I think even Rhaenyra got to sit on it briefly, for a short time while she was queen, which didn't even get recognized after the fact. And I think if George is trying to kind of recreate that a little bit, then he might give her a chance to actually sit on it and actually be queen for a short time, and then probably have it erased from the history books, because they're usually written by men that don't want to see women in power. So anyway, my own little nitpick, but I could see him doing that, letting her have power, but then it not even being remembered.
Yes, which takes me on to sort of a fire and blood kind of question. We've got a proper fire and blood question in a moment, but do you think then that one of the things I know we both got very strongly from Fire and Blood was the fact that whereas we'd previously been taught of the Targaryen history as being this long reign, line of kings, in reality, when you look at it, the amount of Targaryen queens who were ruling in one way, shape, or form, or who should have ruled but had the throne taken from them, or did actually rule but history decided to forget them because they lost the war. It was astonishing. I mean, I counted like 7 or 8 people who Targaryens just in that period of time who could have been the ruler of the Seven Kingdoms, or actually technically were ruling the Seven Kingdoms, but we just never see them as being the ruler of the Seven Kingdoms. Do you think this is setting up that point that you were just making, that George R.R. Martin could have Daenerys rule, but it just get effectively forgotten or expunged or ignored?
Yeah, and I mean, I think when I read Fire and Blood before season 8 happened, I was really hoping he was showing all of these women getting passed over and denied power to actually allow a woman to finally be in control for once. And so I do still think that could happen. I have to imagine that he's going to at least allow her to have power for a short time. I mean, she's kind of been driving toward this for so long, it seems especially cruel to deny it completely. And so like I said, I think I see there's a lot of parallels between Rhaenyra and Cersei, but I also think there are some between Rhaenyra and Daenerys, and I can definitely see her, like I said, getting power for at least a short time, and then it just being written out of history. The only caveat to that, though, I would say, is if Bran does become king, knowing that he has access to all of the actual history that happened and not just what people were told by the maesters, maybe he will actually have an accurate account written, and we will get, maybe it will kind of flip that narrative with Rhaenyra, and we will actually see that she is remembered and she is listed as a queen, where Rhaenyra never got that chance. So I would like to see that. I think that would be a nice touch if Bran got to have an actual accurate history written.
Yeah, whether we will ever see it, because I mean, I don't know quite how far they're going to go. I think they'll probably end with the same kind of and once the story arcs have ended, then the story itself will end, without giving us, huge amounts about what happens afterwards.
The only thing I could see like a time jump epilogue where it kind of just briefly touches on what's been going on since.
I'm not a big fan of the 20 years later Harry Potter type thing. I have to say.
I don't know about 20 years later, but maybe showing some of the rebuilding that's going on. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I like it, but I'm not sure I've ever seen it done well. I like it in terms of I'm always inquisitive when I reach the end of a big story, what happened after that. But I struggle to think of a time that actually it's worked as well as the main story itself, and I quite like it just being left to my own imagination. I have to say. So I think the only thing I'd add to that, I found that really interesting what you were saying. I think the only thing I would add to that is the answer that we often come up with George R. R. Martin and Song of Ice and Fire is it will be more complicated than that, is the sort of the answer. And so she may well sit as queen in King's Landing. However, we already know that the North doesn't recognize the monarch of the Seven Kingdoms anymore. We'll probably find that the Vale doesn't. If we're correct in suggesting that perhaps we get Cersei retreating back to Casterly Rock, we certainly know the Iron Islands won't be recognizing anyone in King's Landing. Actually, we might find that Daenerys is a situation where she might technically be ruling from the Iron Throne for a period of time, however short, but is not recognized by the vast majority of the Seven Kingdoms of Westeros. So I think that it will get very complicated as to who actually recognizes her. It's not going to be, at any point, I suspect, in these books, a simple matter of, until the end, very, very end, a simple matter of whoever is in King's Landing is the monarch. They might well rule in King's Landing, but perhaps not much further than that.
And that could be part of what drives her to join the fight against the others. If, she is nominally ruling, but no one's recognizing it, she could think, well, if I'm going to be queen, then I need to join this fight and I need to protect my people. And that could be something that helps prompt her to fight them. So I could see that.
Yeah, good point. I like that. Just a couple of things from the chat. A girl says, will the Quaithe-Dany relationship continue and affect the outcome in the books? Yeah, I think it will. I think we touched on this a little bit earlier. I'd be interested, actually, in your thoughts, Vanessa, in terms of Quaithe going forward. But I think that Quaithe is not going to suddenly stop projecting herself into Dany's dreams and things like that. She clearly has an agenda. Whoever you think she might be, if she is like somebody secret hidden, she clearly has an agenda, which is to get Dany to regain her Targaryenness, so to speak, to get back onto this kind of fire and blood bandwagon and invade Westeros. That's clearly what Quaithe is about. And she's trying to give her advice on who not to trust in all of this, because she knows that there's going to be huge amounts of people trying to get in with Daenerys. So that will continue until Dany does what Quaithe is wanting her to do, because Dany doesn't have any kind of way of protecting against that, it would appear at the moment. So yes, I think the relationship will continue, and I think it will continue in the same sort of vein unless and until Dany actively decides that Quaithe is not acting in her best interests. And I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon, because I think the things that Quaithe is warning her about are things that she will reflect on and go, actually, yes, you probably were right to be warning about that. Beware of the perfumed seneschal, for example, is probably Varys and the Mama's dragon and all the rest of it. These are the kinds of things that actually she should be wary of. But what's your take on Quaithe, just generally?
I'm not a huge fan of the character. It's interesting having this mysterious person that's kind of jumped into her life and telling her things, but I want to know backstory. I want to know why, who, what's the point, and I don't know if we'll even ever get that. So it's hard to really judge Quaithe as a character without knowing her motivations. But I kind of agree with you that I think she is right to tell Daenerys to beware of the people she is, making her wary of. But because she's so vague, I think it kind of fuels her paranoia and is not going to serve her well in the end because she's constantly second guessing. Okay, well, what does this mean? What does that mean? And like, just Daenerys is basically like, just tell it to me straight. So I know what you're talking about. Like, quit speaking in riddles. But yeah, I do think that, and I don't know, maybe Quaithe is someone who has seen Daenerys's greater purpose and that she is going to be instrumental in finding the others, and so she knows that some of these people that are coming to her have their own agendas and are going to want her to do other things. Like Coro's going to want her to probably help free the slaves in some of the free cities, and Tyrion's all about getting revenge on his family. And so obviously they're going to want to use her and use her dragons to accomplish their own ends rather than what her ultimate purpose should be. So that's kind of my take on and what I think is happening with Quaithe. But like I said, I would really love to know who she is and why she's telling her these things.
Yeah, and I think we probably will get something of that, because otherwise she is just a completely random character who has a very clear agenda and we don't know why. So I think we probably will get something from there at some point. I think that perhaps when Marwyn arrives, then he might be able to find out what's going on there. If he's taking glass candle with him, for example, this might well be a way that he can start looking out and seeing what's going on, and actually helping out Dany with a little bit of long-term sort of long distance reconnaissance. So yeah, I think that's entirely possible. But
And
she will.
I was just gonna say real quick, like my pet theory is that Quaithe is Shiera Seastar, because we know that she's already tried to use sorcery and magic to like keep herself young and prolong her age, just like her mother did the same kind of thing. Serenay, however you say it. She was, sorcery and trying to prolong her life, and we already know Bloodraven is way past his mortality. So I like the idea that Bloodraven and Shiera are both involved in trying to push people into this conflict with the dead, and then Melisandre, who maybe is their child. That's another theory that I really enjoy. So the three of them all being involved in that ultimate fight, I think is a cool idea.
You had me until Melisandre is maybe their child. I think that I'll leave that one to a side for a moment.
If you haven't read the theory, it's actually really good.
Yeah, okay. I'll allow myself to be convinced on that another time. But on Shiera Seastar, I also really like this kind of balance. George R. R. Martin does a lot of things with balance in his stories, and so we've clearly got Jon and Dany, and Jon is being subtly manipulated and driven towards his destiny by Bloodraven. Or what Bloodraven thinks Jon's destiny should be, because he sees him as being the prince that was promised or whatever. And it really works for me that Shiera Seastar, his old lover, sister, whatever, is actually over there and has decided that Dany is the character who should be, or the person who is sort of Azor Ahai reborn, and therefore is pushing her there, and that eventually these two characters who meet up again astrally in some way, and sort of realize actually we've been wanting the same thing, but we've been identifying different lead characters in this, and that really works for me, is this idea that I might go, well, who is it who is this Azor Ahai reborn. I love it. It really works for me. I don't think it'll be done that simply. I think it'll just be hinted at many levels, but yeah, I'm not so sure about Melisandre, I have to say. I did see someone in the chat was saying that Quaithe was from the Church of Starry Wisdom, which is something we don't actually have huge amounts of detail from. This is connected over in UT. There is a Church of Starry Wisdom in Bravos as well, and this is the Bloodstone, effectively a cult descending from the Bloodstone Emperor and the ancient stuff going on the far side there, which is connected almost certainly with the original Long Night, but the sort of the Essos version of it. So I like that. I think that the support for that, however, is a lot more thematic than sort of like actual clear hints. So I don't think we can say definitively that that's who Quaithe is, but it's certainly a possibility. I just like and prefer the Shira Sea Star thing, I have to say. Where are we up to? I think we had another question to do. Yeah, so Nana L, this is I think my last Patreon question, saying, having read Fire and Blood, I found it much easier to view Dany as a throwback to the Targaryen conquerors rather than a roll of the dice mad, or the flip of the coin, which is how some people sort of describe it. You flip a coin with a new Targaryen, are they mad or not mad? It's the ones who are focused on governance and became more Westerosi who seem to be the outliers in the lineage. If, as you surmise, the book Fiery Battle for King's Landing will be with Aegon the Pretender, which is what we'll be talking about just a moment ago, it's completely within the historical context of the dynasty. Would you and Vanessa please comment? So how do you think, Vanessa, that Dany kind of fits into the sort of the context of old Targaryens? Does she feel like any of the? You mentioned a couple of previous Targaryens that you thought that there was some kind of similarities with, but do you think that she is very much chip off the old block, just very much a Targaryen, or is she more than this in some way?
I mean, I think she fits kind of along the lines with the ones that we've seen in the histories. Definitely Aegon the Conqueror. And he wasn't necessarily seen as a bad person. I think he's written about pretty favorably in the histories that we've seen. So I don't, and like I said, what bothers me is when people try to single her out as especially bad when there are so many other people contending for power in the series that are much worse, in my opinion. And it seems like it's looked upon differently for her for some reason, and I don't know if it's because she's a woman, because she's seen as a foreigner, even though she was born in Westeros. I think it's just with most of what George has written, it's really just depends on your perspective on how you view her, both as a reader and in the universe too. Because there are people that are still loyal to the Targaryens that probably would welcome her coming, and of course there are plenty of people that wouldn't. So I think it's purposeful that we're not necessarily supposed to know how we feel about it. But I do think she is somewhat different in that some of the big legacy of Valyria, which is her ancestral homeland, is slavery, and she's doing her best to undo that. That's her main goal in Essos is to free people and liberate these people that have been enslaved for so long, and most of that has to do with her ancestors in Valyria, and they're the ones that put people in chains to begin with. And so I think that I really do like that about her character, is that she is in some small way trying to undo some of the negative legacy of her ancestors.
Yes, I think that's a really important point in defense of Dany. Whenever it's people kind of try and cast her as being mad or bad or anything like that, we do have to remember that she is proactively trying to end slavery, which I think in anyone's book is a good thing, and it's something that others had the power to do and didn't do. She really is the first in her family to proactively go and try and sort this out. So yeah, I think that's I mean, this morally had another question about how will she be looked on if we had Fire and Blood Part 3, how would she be looked on favorably or not? And I think that is clearly a big mark in her favor. We had a couple of super chats. So Roland de Stark says, since the Danes have the same looks as the Targaryens, do you think that fake Aegon could be Ned Dane, I assume that is, and Ashara Scepter Lemore? I think personally, no. I've seen this before. So in terms of Ned Dane, no, he's definitely still running around in Westeros. And Ashara, could she be Scepter Lemore? I mean, she could, but I hold by the theory that she is currently in Deepwater Watch in the neck. I think that she and Howland Reed got together. I think I've got a whole video on it. If it's the first time you've heard that theory, then it does sound a little bit, let's just pick two random names and say that they got together. But there is actually quite a lot of evidence to suggest that they probably did get together, and then Ashara faked her death and then went off to be the mother, or she already was by that point, the mother of Mira and Jojen. So I think that's what's happened with her. My take on fake Aegon is that he is a Blackfire. I think he is a Blackfire by the female line. We've had a lot of hints about this in A Song of Ice and Fire, hints that Blackfires have died off in the male line, ... implying that the female line is still there. We've had comments about what does it matter if the dragon's black or red, because of course those are the two different colors for the Targaryens and the Blackfires, and a huge amount of other hints going on around there that he is a Blackfire. So I think that's what's going on there, and so I wouldn't put it beyond sort of any doubt, any sort of, or beyond the pale, the idea that Septim Lemore is a character that we've heard of from somewhere else, given the fact that we've already got John Connington, who was there pretending to be someone else and in disguise. But Septim Lemore, I don't think it's likely to be a Shara Dane. But any thoughts on that one? Do you think that the Danes are involved over there?
Yeah, I don't think so. I definitely don't think it's Ashara. I think Tyrion would have noticed the purple eyes. I mean, everyone talks about how striking her eyes were, and we don't get any comment about that with Septim Lemore. And I think that'd be a big detail he would notice. I mean, he noticed young Griff's eyes. So I think that would have jumped out. I do agree with you that Aegon is a Blackfire. I think he's Sarah and Illyrio's son. Illyrio seems very, very protective and has like a special interest in him and has all of these things to give him. So I could definitely see that being what's really motivating him. And one of the biggest clues I think that he's a Blackfire is the story about the sign from the Clinking Dragon. This black iron sign that gets torn down and thrown in the river, and then it washes up later and it's turned red with rust. So black dragon turning red when it comes ashore. Yeah, just screams that this is a Blackfire pretending to be a Targaryen to me. So yeah, as far as Dane involvement, I don't see that really in his storyline in Essos, but maybe they'll be involved in him helping him get the throne when he comes to Westeros.
Yeah, so I think Dane involvement will be through I've entirely forgotten his name now.
Darkstar.
Rogue Dane. Darkstar.
Darkstar, yeah.
When we've been talking for 2 hours, suddenly names disappear. So Darkstar, my personal take is what's going to happen is that Darkstar is going to go and he's going to take Dawn and claim to be the Sword of the Morning, and he will go and join and somebody, it might have been Joe Magician who said this to me first, so I'll give him credit for it. So he will join up with the Aegon retinue, and he will join the Kingsguard, of which at the moment there's just one member, but it would add to this idea of a Targaryen continuity if we've got somebody in the line of Arthur Dayne who is there being or sort of from the same wider family, being the Sword of the Morning, supporting Aegon as part of the Kingsguard. So I think that's what's going to happen. And the fact that he's connected in with the whole Dawn subplot means that Dawn, I suspect, through Arianne, also going to make contact, and they will bring Dawn into this as well. So I think that's where that whole thing is going to be going. And I think that the Danes there will be caught up through Darkstar. Ned Dane, however, is not. He's still running around in the Riverlands all over the place with the Brotherhood without banners. So that's an entirely different plot. And I think that just for sake of completion, I think Arthur's dead, and I think Ashara is in Deepwater Watch. Greywater Watch, I should say. I'm getting all my words wrong now, which seems to imply I should probably stop speaking soon. Donald Peoples, thank you so much for the super sticker that says thank you. I like that one. That's really kind, very generous of you too. Thank you very much. So guys, I think we're going to round off and now, is there anything else you want to, just before we end though, anything else, Vanessa, you want to just sort of highlight about Daenerys, something that you think we sort of missed in some way?
I don't know if there's anything we necessarily missed. I did just want to say, I've always been a big fan of her character. I kind of hate what happened in the show, but I think even if she goes down this darker path, I don't see it being completely black and white like they tried to lay it out, like good versus evil. I think it's going to be very complex and ambivalent about what we're supposed to think about it, and we're going to be left to draw our own conclusions. And so, if you're a fan of Daenerys, don't feel bad about it. Like it's perfectly fine to still love her character. And there are so many wonderfully complex, interesting characters in George's books, and she's, I think, one of the biggest. I think she's going to have a huge impact on the plot. I think she's going to have a lot more to do with the end game than we got to see in the show. And I think, if you love her, there's nothing wrong with it. Keep loving her. People love villains all the time, and there's nothing wrong with that either. So don't feel bad about being a Daenerys fan, even with what happened.
Yeah, I would agree with that completely. I think she's a great character, regardless of what happens. She's a fantastic creation from George R. R. Martin, and I really enjoy. She's one of the characters. People know Tyrion's my favourite character to read, but of the sort of the ones underneath that, I always love reading Daenerys' characters because she is actually a very complicated character with a lot of different drives pushing her in different ways, and what she does affects so many people in the way that some of the characters, what they do actually fundamentally doesn't affect that amount of people at the moment, but Daenerys, what she does affect thousands, hundreds of thousands of people. Okay, so Vanessa, why don't you just round off by reminding us where people can find you on the internet?
Sure. Well, you can find me still writing for watchersonthewall.com. We are still covering a little bit of Game of Thrones stuff. We got the Emmys coming up, so we'll be talking about that. We'll be talking about that and the prequel on the Night's Cast. We'll be delving into some more of the books and the histories there. So check that out. And Westworld will be coming up. Hopefully in a few months we'll be getting some more concrete news about when that returns. So Westworld Watchers, we'll be writing about that there. And just come check out my art on my website, vkcoleart.com, and you can find me on Patreon as well at vkcoleart.
Excellent. And as I always say, I only have people on here when I will personally recommend their work, and I would humbly suggest that you check out as many of those things as you humanly can. I'm a big fan of Vanessa's art, but also her writing and the other stuff she does with the Night's Cast as well. Okay, guys, as far as I'm concerned, if you're watching this a little bit later, I'll just take you off screen for a moment. Vanessa is appearing somewhere up here will be a link to some other live streams, and in my few moments appearing up somewhere up here will be a link to my Patreon. But guys, thank you so much. Thank you, Vanessa, for coming on. It's always a pleasure. Thank you for the super chats. A fantastic conversation going on in the chat. And guys, I will see you same time next week. Take care, everyone. I shall see
Thanks,
you soon.
everyone.